When we talk about the biggest and most important artists in hip hop for the 2010s decade, there's a lot of names that come to mind. And lately, there's been this huge Mount Rushmore of the 2010s decade that's kind of been floating on the internet. Everybody's given their own takes, but I think it's time for us to finally address this and give our top four of that decade.
Absolutely. And listen, guys, just before we get into this, our Patreon's live. So if you guys enjoy content from us and you guys do want to support us, all of our exclusive content is in the link in the description.
We're doing debates on there. We're doing
Absolutely.
classic album reviews and a bunch of dope content. So link is in the description for that. And you guys can find more weekly bonus episodes on there. And just speaking about this topic, it's a big one because there's so many people that could be left out. But at the same time, there's also artists that kind of need to be on that list that are not debatable, in my opinion.
Okay, so let's start like this. What constitutes a Mount Rushmore? What's the basis of it? What are we doing? We're doing skill. We're doing, let's say, impact, influence. Like, what's going on
I feel like the biggest factor is definitely kind of impact and influence, not only on other artists, but also on the genre of hip-hop in general. Apart from that, looking at kind of social impact and how their music has affected people beyond the bounds of just, listening to it casually. Like, how has it impacted a society, for example? That's kind of important too.
Absolutely. One big one for me is the quality of projects that have came out throughout that span of time. So, if your artist only dropped like one album that really made that impact, while other ones had, 3 to 4 albums that were in that play that were really bringing up the genre as a whole, then that gets a +1
also,
with me.
Longevity too, man. Like, how
Facts.
consistent have you been from 2010 or 2011 till 2020? How has that run been for you? Apart from that, of course, skill is a big one. How talented are these artists? So let's start off with our runners up. We'll name a couple each. So who's the first runner up that kind of doesn't quite crack the top 4 for you?
Future has to be.
He's a huge runner-up.
He's
yeah,
a
definitely.
massive runner-up, and I believe LeBron had this as his number 4 pick. And listen, it's so fucking debatable because the way that he dropped DS2 and even Monster, and the way like those two projects really shaped the sound for the second half of the decade, and you saw how everyone was transitioning into trap music. That was incredible to see. Not only that, but as a hip hop fan myself, I remember when Future was coming out and he was really releasing like banger after banger. I remember when Stick Talk hit. I remember when Fuck Up Some Commas hit. I remember Where You At hit. There was just March Madness was massive. What a Time to Be Alive.
Yeah.
That 2015 run was so memorable. And then, he obviously followed it up by, Crazy Bangers obviously after, and he had his run. So there's a very big debate to say that Future deserves
honestly,
to be there.
If there's a 5th spot, it might just have to be Future because, like you were saying, that run in 2015 to me is the best run a trap artist has ever had in the span of 1 year. If you look at what he did, he had DS2, which is one of the best trap albums of all time. He had 2 of his most acclaimed mixtapes in 56 Nights and Beast Mode. Not only that, but he had What a Time to Be Alive with Drake all come out in that same year. And I just love the way that Future really brought trap and kind of built a foundation of what today is kind of ATL trap and that what that sound has evolved to. Of course, he was inspired by Gucci Mane and Jeezy, but he kind of fit the blueprint by putting in these auto-tuned vocals and not using it for singing, but using it for rapping and kind of that drug talk that he would bring throughout his bars. So
not only that, but I feel as if he's also the one guy that was able to take trap music and put it on into a mainstream level like that. Like obviously, Jeezy was able to do that and Gucci Mane had his commercial success, but the way that Future was able to sell like just records as a whole was quite amazing.
Yeah.
Like the amount of records that he was able to break from 2015 and on, especially after that record run, was really impressive. And not only that, but it also caught the attention by Drake to be able to come in and like really bring it to that pop mainstream level. Like think about it, if DS2 never drops, does Culture hit as big as Culture hit? The stuff like, let's say, even Barter 6 hit as much as it hit. Like that album was literally that focal point for ATL trap where it was like, okay, now it's going to an international level and now it's going to an international fan base. So Future has to be there in my books.
I want to shout out a couple other runners up, and one of them to me is a very underrated pick, and to me it's Rock Marciano, who has kind of been hailed the king of the underground, and that's just because of what he did on Marsburg in 2010, where he kind of built the blueprint for the wave of the new golden era of hip hop, where rappers are starting to rap over these drumless beats, where what's valued is quality but also consistency. I mean, Rock Marciano dropped 10 projects in the 2010s, and in some years, he would even drop 2 projects in the same year. And that's kind of a formula that's kind of inspired acts such as Griselda to drop what they've done. Yes.
And because he was able to really place that blueprint, for consistency and quality.
Yeah.
Having the consistent drops and, dropping on a regular basis to feed your fans, but also giving top level quality and making it refreshing every time. No one has really done that in the hip hop genre, such as Rock Marciano, and seeing the way Griselda was able to grab onto that and, kind of shape the underground after him.
Yeah.
And, being able to carry that torch for him, especially Freddie Gibbs after too. Like, Freddie obviously had some time off for a bit, but when it came to dropping consistent projects, especially year after year, no one really like Freddie Gibbs was doing it, so you were able to see the impact of that.
Yeah, and what a run he's had. I mean, from Marsburg to Reloaded to, Marcy Buku to Marcialago, just amazing projects all throughout that decade. And he just took something that no one had really, really attempted in the longest time and kind of set this blueprint for everyone to follow after. And he just doesn't get the love that he deserves. So I felt like, he is in that conversation for the Mount Rushmore of the 2010s. Someone else who's in there as well is Young Thug. I mean, think about how many artists nowadays sound like Young Thug and are directly influenced by Thugger.
No, that's facts. That is facts. It's just, I feel as if on his end, it's really aesthetic based, because the way he was also able to come out and, show his flair, maybe show the different way, artists could dress and the way that they could express themselves. That's massive for the industry, because look at how many people thanked Thugger for that run and what he was able to do. I mean, that Jeffrey cover was so influential for rappers to come.
That dress is in a fucking museum, man.
Because that's what I'm talking about, is that he was able to be iconic at such an early time and really bring out that flavor. Because, example, you go back to ATL and, the sounds that came from the South, we talk about the way Andre 3K was doing that with the flare, the flare outfits and really bringing out that style and being unique from everyone else. It's just that I feel as if Thug did that for the new generation.
That's a good comparison, because if you think about it, the way that they can both, play with their vocal complexions, I mean, Thug may be, the modern trap version, let's say, of Andre 3K.
But you hear the influence
of
within it.
Of course you do,
and not only that, but...
And the Lil Wayne influence, too.
Absolutely.
If anything, Wayne is one of, if not the biggest influence for Thugger, so...
And the way that Thug was able to take those two styles and keep that, sort of heritage in hip-hop going was really nice, because it was refreshing. There was no one dressing like he was dressing. There was no one releasing the style of mixtapes. People were bashing him for his, let's say... subpar content matter, but it didn't necessarily matter.
It's all about the flair, man. It's about style over substance with Thugger, and he's given us that.
It's the flow, it's the voice, it's the vocal effects, it's everything.
And think about what's crazy is that he only has one studio album out in the 2010s, and yet he's one of the most memorable artists of that
30.
decade. I know, man.
He's under 30. Like, no one realizes that. Like, Young Thug literally has so much time to craft a beautiful career, and he already has iconic projects to his name. Like, talk about Barter 6, talk about Jeffrey, talk about So Much Fun. Those are fan favorites, and all crafted within the 2010 decade. And if it wasn't for Thug, you wouldn't have seen that that switch stylistically. You wouldn't have seen the change in the change in the aesthetics of sounds and the way people were using their vocals. Really a master at work.
I think we've spent enough time on the runners up, but I do want to shout out some other names before going into our actual Mount Rushmore. So of course Nicki Minaj is in that short list. Travis Scott, I think, deserves to be in the conversation as well.
J.Cole deserves to be in there as well.
Well, J.Cole is actually in our Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, whoa, man, I fucked up on that
all
one.
Good.
Holy shit. But
okay, J.Cole is in there, but I would put Tyler, the Creator, there.
Okay.
I'd put Mac Miller in the conversation. I'd put Vince Staples in the conversation. And I think that about sums it up. I mean, obviously Lil Wayne, of course, but I would put him more in the 2000s Mount Rushmore. So.
Well, I can't believe I fucked up on the J. Cole one. My bad, guys. That's horrible of me. I spoiled already our first one, but let's do it.
So start off with J. Cole.
Let's start off with J. Cole. Let's cover up my fuck up, but let's go through it. Let's see what's going on.
For me, when I looked at, of course, there was the Rap Caviar Mount Rushmore graphic that had Drake, Kendrick, and J. Cole's faces on the Mount Rushmore. And spoiler alert, those are 3 out of our 4 picks for the Mount Rushmore. I think you guys saw that coming. But to me, in total honesty, I think that all 3 artists have had a huge impact, but Drake and Kendrick are the locks. Those ones have to be there. J. Cole deserves a spot on it, but I feel like those 2 really cemented a spot. But speaking of J. Cole, you have to give him his flowers, because the evolution that he's had as an artist and throughout his discography, if you look at kind of how at the beginning, I mean, if you look at the mixtapes and something like Sideline Story and Born Sinner, that was really about him, his come-up story, his life. But if you look at, let's say For Your Eyes Only, he told somebody else's story. Then you look at KOD, he takes on the Godfather role of giving advice to the new generation. So how do you feel about Cole and kind of how he's progressed throughout his career?
Well, it's quite amazing because he's really upgraded in the way that he delivers these projects, and that's something I have to say because, as you had mentioned before, his first project starting off his career were really centric around him and the way that he was doing things, but he was really trying to bring in these conceptual based themes within his projects. Example, like looking at the way that he was completely switching 2014 For Us Still Drives all the way to For Your Eyes Only. That was the first time that I feel as if we really saw that switch within J. Cole's content matter, and then you saw that he brought it again with another concept album in 2018, and then obviously we got the offseason that's in 2021, so who knows, he may go on another crazy run, but
he's kind of hinting at retirement, right? So I don't know.
That's for another episode. We'll talk about that later. But the beautiful part about about J. Cole's run in 2010 is that it's always stayed humble. It's never changed and it's never dipped in quality. It's always stayed fresh, and it's always stayed in a place where the replay value was never diminished, because you go to any one of those projects that he's released from 2010 all the way to, let's say, 2020. I'll include 2010 in there because whatever you can. There's quality nonetheless.
Yeah,
and I feel as if, as I mentioned on a lot of these J. Cole videos, there's unnecessary gripes with his music. Like, people say it's boring, people say this and that. And I think it just comes down to J. Cole is just too perfect of a rapper. Like, the way that he glides on a beat and the way that he's really bringing in the rapping style is beautiful.
I feel like when we look at kind of rappers and their personas, he's kind of seen as the average Joe rapper, because he raps very well. His flows are always on point. Delivery's always great. Very relatable rapper, but kind of doesn't have the most exquisite vocabulary, or doesn't go into as much lyrical depth, let's say, as Kendrick, for example. But that's something that's kind of seen to me as a positive thing, is that, yes, he's kind of the average Joe of rap in a way, but he's still elevating and still bringing these themes together that are very powerful and poignant to society, in my opinion.
But I agree with you to a certain extent that maybe, yes, it's not as refined and as exquisite as Kendrick is, but when it comes to building imagery and when it comes to, really building complicated stories, I feel as if there's very few people that do it like J. Cole.
100%.
Example, take For Your Eyes Only. Like, who do you know that would be able to pull off an album like that? Like, there's really no one that comes to mind now.
There's not many. I mean, there's definitely a group of artists that have had the ability to build strong concept albums, but that's definitely a standout in Cole's discography. One thing I want to talk about too is his production. I mean, look at what he did for Kendrick on High Power and The Jig Is Up. Look what he's done with, R&P from Corday. Super underrated as a producer. Of course, he's done a lot of his own production, and what he's been able to assemble with the team of talent at Dreamville has been astounding, and salutes to him. One thing that I think that is a reason why people feel like he shouldn't be on the list is the influence thing. So do you feel like a lot of rappers have been influenced by Cole, and do you feel like he's changed the style of hip-hop or the genre in any way?
I feel as if he's so unique on his own basis that it's kind of hard to tell on the influence basis. But where I feel as if he really gets the number one mark for me is on his consistency. Because the thing is that obviously, you can make the argument for the influence. That's obviously a valid argument to make. But when it comes to
influence, maybe people like Jid, like Saba,
like Corday, there's a lot of people he has that maybe the mainstream hip hop scene doesn't see. But for myself, if I have to say the number one reason why he deserves to be on this list, it's just the consistency.
Yeah.
Like, project after project, it's almost near flawless. Like, there's very few J. Cole songs where I feel like, okay, this is a skip for me. Like, I always find myself going back and diving into old projects and be like, okay, I picked this up on a second or a third listen. Oh, okay, this should have made my rotation the first time, or oh, this and that. So it's always a guessing game with J. Cole's music. And as far as the consistency goes, again, very few fucking people that are able to match up to that. Not only that, but maybe out of the next three guys that we're going to mention, he maybe has some of the best consistency out of all three of them, except for one, which is Kendrick. Maybe which is Kendrick. That's the only one that I have to say. But the thing is that J. Cole's cemented for me and literally one of the most iconic rap careers.
I definitely disagree about him being the most consistent out of the list. If anything, to be honest, he might be at the bottom of that.
Really?
In my opinion. But speaking of Kendrick, let's get into this, because there's not many rappers who are only 10 years into their careers and that are already seriously considered in that GOAT conversation. How many people could you say that about? And it comes down to him having a near perfect discography. from beginning to end, man, there's no fucking misses, and it's at a point where he has 4 studio albums out now, and they can all be debated as classics. That's a fucking astounding resume for Kendrick.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Section 80 and the way that impacted the mixtape era. Well, it's considered a studio album, but it definitely has a mixtape feel to it, but it is considered a studio album. Even Overly Dedicated is a fantastic mixtape, but getting on to GKMC, considered to be one of the best hip-hop albums of all time, and then now how do you top that? Deliver literally probably the consensus number one, best hip hop album of all time. Well, there's obviously a lot more.
I feel like Illmatic's ahead of it. Not for me in my own personal taste, but I'm saying in terms of the general consensus, I think Illmatic is
the general consensus
one.
is that like it's in the
it's
top,
one of the greatest hip hop albums of all time.
Yeah. And like that's crazy to do. Think about that. Like you deliver a masterpiece with GKMC, some of the most timeless music we've ever gotten in a decade, and you follow it up with Pimp a Butterfly. Absolutely insane.
Not only that, but Good Kid, Mad City has been on the Billboard 200 chart for 8 years and going strong on that. So like that to me is the definition of timeless music when it's still being played by the majority of people almost a decade into it.
Most people use GKMC as their Bible, like legitimately. Like people have really taken in a lot of knowledge from that project and have manifested it into their life. Example, like the sort of things I get out of GKMC is, I can't really relate to maybe the street side of things because I wasn't, I didn't grow up in an environment like that. But the thing is that, just questioning which side to go by, questioning, the good and the evils of life, understanding where to go with your own life.
Also, the whole theme of peer pressure too, man. I mean, I could definitely relate to that. I feel like everyone could relate to being in positions where it's like, do I do what's good morally or do I do what people around me are doing and what's easy for me to kind of venture into because it's fun, it's easy. So the amount of themes in that album, the narrative of Good Kid, Mad City, just brilliantly executed. And not only that, but I love Kendrick because he's one of those artists who has used his platform and his influence to tell a positive message, to really be an advocate, not only for, let's say, the Black Lives Matter movement, but for equality. I mean, since the beginning of his career with songs like Fuck Your Ethnicity, all the way, till now, he's still making music that's socially relevant and that has a strong place within politics and just what society is today. So the ability of him doing that, of using his platform to be an advocate for these types of important topics, that alone, I have to give him all the fucking flowers that I possibly can.
What's crazy about Kendrick's music too is that it's so loose and the fact that there's so many different themes you could go with. Like one thing that's really prominent within Kendrick's music for me is the spiritual themes that he picks up upon. Like, obviously, I'm not promoting drugs in the podcast. Don't try this shit at home. But when you're off shrooms and you listen to Kendrick's music, it's a whole different experience, dude.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. Like the way that he's able to
Was
paint.
he your favorite artist to listen to Tripped Out?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Him and Mac Miller are fucking special.
That's awesome.
Him and Mac Miller are special. Whatever. Maybe I'll get onto that in another episode. But, just talking about Kendrick Lamar's music, like, opening my eyes to that there's a higher power out there, opening my eyes to the fact that life is not necessarily all about enjoying the good and all about embracing all of these, indulgences, but also understanding the evil and the pain that comes with it. Like, painting such a realistic picture to a point where, you could live by these rules and you could, almost take it as philosophy. Like, that's what I feel as if Kendrick's music stands for more than anything. Out of the 4 in this list, I think his music is the deepest and well structured.
I think it's the most influential because, like I was saying at the beginning of this, his music goes beyond only impacting the hip hop genre. It impacts society. If you look at a song like All Right, that became a protest song for the Black Lives Matter movement, which is huge. And not only that, but I mean, if you look at the artists he's influenced too, you have the likes of Jid, you have Saba, you have Logic, you have countless names, you have Tory Lanez. I mean, look at the song 4am Flex, man. If you listen to Tory's second verse on that, sounds exactly like The Art of Peer Pressure. So like, I mean, people have been just amazed by Kendrick's run and what he's able to do for the genre. And at this point, I mean, he deserves this 5-year break.
Absolutely.
Because
he's done a lot.
Yeah, he's done a lot.
He's done a lot. Like, think about it. He has to come back with a fresh new perspective. He's given us, beyond perspective on all of his albums. And, when you're talking about getting the best value for $9.99 a month for your Spotify payment, it's not many people that could do that like Kendrick. But let's move on to Drizzy Drake because, that's obviously the third installment on our Rushmore list. And where do you think Drake's biggest strong suit is? Because when it comes to overall playing, I think he's the best overall like player within just being an artist as a whole.
Look, Drake is the one guy where it's like, if he's not on your list along with Kendrick, there's something wrong with your list for this Mount Rushmore. It's to that point because what Drake's been able to do since the beginning, if you look at Thank Me Later and Take Care, the way that he really mixed together the singing and the rapping, and how he went away from the norm of being of having that hyper masculinity, of having to be a dominant and aggressive male force in hip hop. He's like, fuck all that. I'm gonna, make songs for the ladies too. I'm gonna make songs that can cater to everybody. And that's what he's done now. He's brought hip hop to a point where it's reached a global audience and an international audience, to a point where he's playing and he has his hand in every market, man.
Absolutely.
Think about a song like Mia with Bad Bunny. Think about the Jamaican dance hall songs that he's given us. He's really making music for the whole world to listen to, and I feel like he propelled hip hop the most out of anybody else into that pop lane, let's say, along with people like Eminem. He's at the forefront of that.
Absolutely. He had to, he's had the burden of being that forefront, because there's obviously a lot of criticism that comes with that, because you have to maybe dive into other genres and not all your fan base is going to like it. But when it comes to being able to touch the different sounds and being able to perfect those different sounds, there's no one that does it like Drake. And, we've mentioned so many times in the podcast the types of different sounds he's dove into.
He's a chameleon, man.
He does whatever he wants. And I think without Drake, hip hop is not where it's at right now, because he literally took it to the mainstream. He has literally like carried it like by its hand to the mainstream, just based off the record sales. Like, if you look at how much this guy sells and how many people he's able to touch with his records, it's really impressive, and there's no sign of him declining. That's the scary part, is like, we're entering into a whole different decade and he still has his longevity to him, and the way that he's been able to influence rappers to have that R&B dual side to them, of course, with the rapping, like let's say Tory Lanez, or even let's say someone like Brent Faiyaz,
Jack Harlow.
Like, there's a bit of, well, maybe not Brent Faiyaz, a bit less like on the R&B side, but allowing for R&B singers to also collaborate with hip-hop artists on a different level in the new era of the music industry has been quite prominent throughout him, and he's been the longest one to last so far.
He has. And speaking of his records, I mean, he's the king of Billboard. He just won, their award for Artist of the Decade, and deservingly so. Some of his records are that he has the most songs ever to chart on the Billboard Hot 100, and he also, with a total of 209 songs, and he also has the most top 10 singles ever. I think he just hit his 8th #1 song this year. I mean, there's no stopping him. I think that he has the most streamed albums in Spotify history. And not only that, but I mean, like we were saying earlier, he's a chameleon. His versatility has to be saluted, because he can literally tap into any genre that he wants to. And people compare him and say that he's the Michael Jackson of rap. But one more thing I want to ask you about Drake is that, do you think that he's the ultimate king of the cosign? Because I'm not saying that he makes artists that he collabs with.
He makes artists that he collabs with.
No, he doesn't make them, but he gives the recognition to them.
I don't know.
And
there's a lot of people.
There's a lot of artists that have their talent, on their own and on their own merit.
There's a lot of.
You can't tell me that Drake has made their careers per se.
Well, that's very arguable, because without a Drake cosign, who knows where they're at with their careers? Like, think about. I'm not saying they make their career.
I'll give you an example. Look at this one. Look at Kodak Black when he came out with the song "Skirt." Okay, what Drake did just by reposting that song was fucking massive, and he didn't necessarily even collaborate with him. It's the point of the Drake cosign that is just, it's something that everybody needs. Every up and coming rapper wants that because of what it brings you.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that it doesn't necessarily make your talent.
No.
Like, there's a lot of very untalented artists that have a crazy career, and like I'm obviously not gonna name names because that'd be hateful. But Drake has literally solidified careers for people. Like, does Blockboy JB have anything without
this
Drake?
This comes back to what I was saying. It comes down to talent. Right now, Blockboy JB isn't anywhere. But if you
he
look
still had a career though.
Very short-lived.
He made a bag.
It wasn't a run. If you look at Lil Baby, on the other hand, of course, he collabed with him on Yes Indeed. But on Lil Baby's own merit, he's become one of the biggest and hottest rappers in the game. So for me,
that was probably propelled by Drake.
It was he gave him a boost, but he didn't make his talent. What I'm trying to say is that
that's what I said.
Drake gives the artist the right recognition they deserve. He doesn't make their career and make them have longevity in the game.
What I'm talking about, for me, a career and talent is very different. You know, like you
that's
could,
what I'm saying.
It makes the career. Like
It doesn't make their career, no.
It brings it to a whole different level.
It brings it to another level. It gives them a boost. It doesn't make them. It doesn't make them the artists they are and give them.
No, I just said that though. Like, yeah, absolutely.
That was the whole fucking argument.
No, I said that a minute and a half ago. I told you it's not about the talent. It's really not about that. It's really about what he does for people commercially and the way he's able to bring them on a different level. Like his cosigns are literally gold. Like it's the best cosign you could get in the industry, and people know it. As far as commercial levels go. So in my opinion, yes, it does make some careers, because without that cosign, the music probably doesn't go anywhere after that, because people don't have the exposure they could get and they don't have that cosign.
But for those careers to actually be career lasting worthy,
after that
has to be on their own merit.
After that, it's on their own merit, and that's a different discussion. But to really propel a career and to really make it,
Drake is the golden boy for that.
Drake is that guy.
So last on this list, I mean, this is a guy who definitely is on the Mount Rushmore of the 2000s, but I feel like his impact and his level of projects and production cannot be ignored or dismissed for the 2010s either, and that's Kanye West, man. And I feel like at this point, there's been a lot of, debates whether Kanye's fallen off in the 2010s, but to me, he shows no signs of lacking at all. I mean, besides, let's say, one project that we weren't the biggest fans of, his discography is proving to be one of the best of all time.
Absolutely. Who could you really stack next to that discography? There's very few people. Like, Kanye has that discography and he's been able to carry it. Talk about the influence. Look what he's done with Yeezy, in the 2010 decade. Look at the run of having MBDTF, Yeezus, The Life of Pablo, and Ye in the same decade.
And then his collab albums, Watch the Throne and Kids See Ghosts, some of the best collab albums of all time.
So how could you not put this guy on this list? Like, there's so much work that he's done and there's so much quality that he's been able to execute on. It's like, he has to be there. And there's, obviously there's the Jesus is King argument where it's like, okay, it was an inconsistent project. But if you listen to the production and performance on that project, it's still A1 Kanye. I'm sorry. Like, I
wouldn't say it's A1 Kanye, but it's still good.
The production was phenomenal.
Yeah, the production was good.
The production was phenomenal on it. So that's the thing, is like, seeing now where he's at with his career, I'm very excited because his track record to me has been near flawless. Like, he's been able to create quality and timeless music time and time again. And I think people obviously have a problem with Jesus is King because of the whole gospel situation and how, it obviously doesn't speak to everyone. That's fine. But to say that the album is really not well done and that the production was crap or that his performance was crap, I don't think that's merited.
Yeah.
That's the kind of like the sentiment around it. But it's like, who has done what Kanye West has done in the 2010 decade?
Even on a production scale. I mean, I love what he's done by bringing in, these non-traditional elements on albums like Yeezus and on the Life of Pablo. Of course, he had others helping him, but they were on his projects, and I feel like that has influenced artists such as Playboi Carti and Travis Scott, for example, to push the boundaries of their hip hop beats and adding in these elements that were kind of foreign to the game beforehand. So I love what he's done there. And I mean, there's no denying how a lot of this generation's artists, are products of Kanye West.
That is very true. Probably the most influential artist of all time within the hip hop genre. Like, first of all, if you look at what he was doing before this decade, it was absolutely groundbreaking. Obviously, really, well, T-Pain was the one that brought in the auto-tune and really brought it to a whole different level. But 808s and Heartbreak,
808s,
brought it to a whole different level. Like, the fact that he was able to bring in soul samples and, the way he was able to pitch up their voices and make it sound like, cleaner and more grander and sound like, more hitting to your eardrums. That was massive too. So not only did he carry that throughout the 2000s decade, he brought it back within the 2010s and made it even bigger. Like, think about the cinematic value that you've gotten from Kanye West in this decade too. Think about what MBDTF did. Think about Watch the Throne. Think about KSG. These are all albums, in my opinion, that could be interpreted into movies.
Yeah, so, and he showed the power of what it means to assemble a team of Avengers for a track list. I mean, since My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, I feel like a lot of artists have, spent a bigger bag on getting the right features and about putting together the right cast to create, an album that's event worthy. Not only that, but I mean, the way that Kanye West reinvents himself in his sound with every project cannot be ignored. So guys, that kind of sums up our list for the Mount Rushmore of the 2010s. Super dope to get through because there's a lot of other guys that could be subbed in. But let us know your Mount Rushmore of the 2010s in the comments below. Thank you guys for all the support. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We're doing debates like this on the weekly, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you for watching the video. It's always a pleasure doing content for you guys. Listen, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel because we're doing album reviews, and we actually have our series called Everything We Know, where we take you guys through the whole album rollout of the hottest releases of the year. Not only that, guys, but our Patreon plan is now live. You guys can access that in the bio. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.